So I got this model from SketchUp. It's a wonderful, nice, cute little building. I got it from SketchUp. I mean, I suppose I could have modeled it myself, but why do that when someone has already done it for you? So we are going to be using this building for our video this afternoon. So let me just jump right into it and let's start the work. So let's just jump right into it and let's just start working on this in ArchiCAD. So we are going to go back to our floor plan. Now on the basic floor plan page, the first thing we are going to do is to have a base surface that we are going to work with. Now I'm going to be using the mesh tool. The reason I'm using the mesh tool because it gives me more flexibility in terms of alternating different shapes around the mesh and all of that. So that's why I'm using the mesh tool. Otherwise, I could have just used the slab tool, but I'm going to be working with the mesh tool just because of that little flexibility that the mesh offers in ArchiCAD. Now, I have my project references set to 800 mm from my bottom elevation. Now, this is because I already know what the elevation of my building looks like. If you want to look at that, you can always cancel this. Now, let's just go ahead and press Ctrl 7. My building is starting from 450 from the bottom level. I have that already at the back of my mind. Now, if I click on my model, and I go to the 3D, I already have a rough idea about how far it is from the ground level. Now, notice this is not an ArchiCAD model, so I got to know that basically by trial and error effectively. Although there is a way you can actually know this to be precise. You can go to your south elevation and then you can just measure it out from a precise level of your ground floor to where the base of your building starts from. By doing this, you can also add it to the distance between your bottom surface, that's floor 0, and then 450 points, and then you add it to this, and then that gives you somewhere around 800. So that becomes your elevation from your ground floor. That's if you want that to be a bit more precise. But let's go back to the object. Let's go back to the mesh. It's mesh we are using, our object. So under the mesh tool, the first thing you're going to want to do is to just adjust the surfaces. I'm going to be using two different types of surfaces for this particular design. I'm going to be working with grass green and then another grass brown also. I'll show you the reason for that later on. Under my 3D appearances, I want all my ridges to be smooth as opposed to it being sharp. Right, so I'm just going to go with all ridges smooth and then I'm going to click OK. After doing that, the next thing I want to do is to change the orientation of my geometry to a regular slope as opposed to the rectangular method. I'm going to be using a regular slope. The reason I'm using this is because I want to adjust the different points across the mesh. So I'm going to create a plane field just around my property, something like this. I think that's a bit too small. Let me cancel that and do it again. Let's say something like this. Something like this is just about right. Now, these divisions that you can find here just goes to show the different number of horizontal and vertical divisions that you want to have around your mesh. Basically, that's what that means. Now, for my vertical divisions, I'm going to go with something like 20 or maybe 25. That's just the number of vertical divisions I want to have. For my horizontal divisions, I think 30 it's better. You can always adjust this. Now, notice that the more you adjust it, the more points you have around your mesh to make different adjustments and alterations as you go on. The next thing I want to work on is my mesh corner elevation. Now, there are 3 different points that the software gives me the liberty to adjust. I have the bottom, that's the first corner. You look at this plus here, that's what this first corner means. So if I impute a value here, the value I'm imputing is relative to what exactly is going to be on this mesh, around this mesh. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to explain. Now, I already have an idea about how I want my general mesh to slope around, so I'm just going to work with something a bit more arbitrary. So for the bottom surface, because I want it to slope from the back to the front, I'm going to have this to go down by minus 300. I'm going to have that go down by minus 300. And for this other side, that's the right hand side of the bottom area of the mesh, I want it to be slightly different from the left hand side, so I'm just going to go -50. Now I want the back to be higher than the front of my mesh, so I'm just going to make that to be a positive value, maybe something around maybe 500 is just about right. So it slopes from the back to the front. Let's see what that looks like in our 3D. Now, the reason why you notice the mesh is it's as if it has no depth, is because of the slope is occupying, or the slope is eating into the allowable, the allowable thickness of my mesh. So if I want to, what I will have to do now is to increase the thickness of my mesh to be able to see that particular, to be able to see the depth of my mesh essentially. So I'm going to go back to settings, or I could have done that earlier there, but I'm just going to make this 1500 just to add a lot more depth, so I should be able to see the slope around my mesh. If you observe the edges properly, you would rightly see how that the back is significantly higher than the front, and this is significantly, well, not so significant, but it's lower a bit to this right hand side. That's based on the adjustment we made when we were defining the mesh earlier in the video. Now you could see that because of the slope, it looks like it's affecting this entrance. We are going to work on that in a bit, but the first thing we want to do now is to just create some ridges around our mesh, just to give it a lot, just to make it fancier, because if we are talking about creating a cabin in the woods, you notice the floor is not exactly even at this point. Even if the floor is not even, it's even, although it's not on the same elevation. So what we want to do is to adjust that elevation a little bit. Now, because I used the mesh and I did not use a slab, it's easier for me to adjust different mesh points. The divisions we have here, the horizontal and the vertical divisions, allows me to adjust the elevations around the mesh easier. Now I'm going to do some slight adjustments to my mesh. I'll click on one edge. I have only selected the vertical points around the mesh, so I'm just going to click on any point. I come to this one, the elevate mesh point. I click on that. Now I'm going to check this to apply this to all of my horizontal mesh points that were initially selected. Now what I want to do is to raise this up a little bit. I want to raise the elevation or the height of my mesh up, and I want to make that, say, 600 for example, and I'm going to apply to all, and then I click OK. If I come to my 3D window, this is what I have created. I just raised the ridges up a little bit, so you can see how this one came out. I'm going to repeat the same across the mesh. I'm going to do it first in an arbitrary fashion, and then I'll come to the 3D and do some manual editing essentially. So let's go back to our floor plan. I'm going to come to this edge. I want to raise this one a little bit, apply it to all. I want this one to be maybe higher than the one on the right, so maybe 900. Then I click OK. Let's say I want to do the same thing for the horizontal lines. I click on this one, apply to all. I could do 50, apply to all. Now the reason I'm applying to all is so that I don't repeat the same thing for different points on the mesh essentially. Apply to all. Let's say I want that to just go down a little bit, minus 100. Apply to all. I could do the same thing for this point. I could probably take this one, let's say I want this one to be 0, apply to all. It's a bit more subtle. And then I raise this one a little bit, also apply to all. I could go 450, apply to all. Let's say I want this one also to go up. I click on it and then I go apply to all. Let's say 500. Apply to all. I come to this other elevation line also, maybe this one. There's something I'm trying to achieve. Let me move the building a little bit to the right, or let me move my mesh a little bit to the right. I'm trying to achieve a particular walkway with the mesh, so I move the mesh a little bit to the right, so I should be able to do that now. Maybe a little bit more. just drag it all the way to the right. I'm trying to achieve a walkway with my mesh. So I'm going to click on this one, and then I'm going to go apply to all, probably 500. Okay. All right, we could do, let's repeat that for this one also. I'm going to say apply to all. We could take that down, let's say minus 250. Okay. Let's work on some of the horizontal lines also, so it's a bit more, so it's not so, one way. I could take this one up by, let's say 300, and then apply to all. Let's see what we've done so far on the 3D space. So it's a bit better. Okay. Now, if we want to adjust the entrance a little bit on the plan, because right now it's a bit more chaotic at the entrance level, although maybe that's the idea that we were going for. So I'm going to do some editing right here in the 3D space. I'm going to escape it, click on any points. I'm going to click on this point, and I'll come to elevate the mesh point, and then I'll just take it down a little bit. I do that for this one, just take it down a little bit. I can find that other node, take it down a little bit. If it's too much, I can always take this one down a little bit. I'm trying to open up the entrance of the mesh a little bit, just so it's not so. I'm trying to open up the entrance of the mesh. I could take this one down a little bit. Just click on this node, take it down. Okay, maybe that's okay. Now what we are going for, it's a cabin in the wood type of rendering, right? So maybe these ridges, maybe I think they are okay. I think they are okay, right? All right, I think they are okay. All right, now if we go to, I want to do a small pond in front of my building, and I'm going to do that adjustment right here in the 3D space. I just want to have a pond around this area, so I'm going to escape it. I'll click on it once. Just going to click on this any point, just take it down a little bit, just reduce the elevation. I'm trying to create an opening where I'm going to have a pond water fill using either a slab or mesh tool. Anyone could work. Just trying to create an open using the different mesh point. What I'm doing essentially is to just reduce the elevation. All right, I think that feels a bit small. Let's say I want to increase it a little bit, just so when we add the material for the water, it's going to be a bit more pronounced. All right, now let's add the material first. We can always edit it as we go on. Now I'm going to use the slab tool for that particular effect. I'm going to click on the slab tool. The pond is already activated. Let me draw it. I could adjust these settings later on to be precise. So I click OK, and then I just draw my slab across this point. I think that's where my water fill is going to be. All right, so that's the water that I just drew around. I could move it. Let me move it a little bit, ever so slightly to the left. Just move it a little bit. All right, now I can still reduce the elevation, just so I can have the water pond a bit more pronounced. Another way I can do that is to click on the water and then increase the reference plane. That's you increase the offset from the bottom reference. I could take it up by 150, for example. So it comes up. I could do that by making it 200, so it's a bit more pronounced. If I want the water to be on the surface, I could raise it all the way to the surface, but that's not the idea I'm going for. I think 250 should be fine. I can just increase this to 500 just to give it a bit more depth. Okay, I can still play around with it if I want to. I can go ahead and just reduce this one a little bit just to have the water feel to be a bit more pronounced. Okay. I don't want the edge of the water to quite show, so that's why I had to raise that other point back up. All right, let's take this one up a notch to 350, because we're starting to feel as though the water is not really there. When we start rendering and applying materials, you're going to see it come to life a lot more. You can always make it a bit deeper if it's too shallow. Create any of the points, reduce it a little bit. If you're okay with it, that's fine. I just felt it was a bit too shallow, so I wanted to just adjust it a little bit. All right, so that's just about the pond. Now you can decide to create pockets of water across our area, but I find this is just enough. Maybe I can do a little bit of pocket of water on any other corner, but I think this is okay. Now let me go ahead and just create a couple more ridges around my building. I don't want to adjust, I don't want to deface what I have here when it comes to my pond, so I'll try not to have any more pronounced points. So I'm just going to do some scattered editing, and I'm not going to apply it to all. I'm going to click on this point. I don't want to apply it to all. Let's say I want that to be 300. These are just scattered points, not applying to all. That could go down a little bit. Now, mind you, these are all arbitrary elevations that I'm using. I'm not working from any particular reference. If you want to have a more precise idea of what a cabin in the woods would look like, you could look for a proper reference image and then try to model your mesh around that reference image. All right, now the reason I kept this one a little bit more freer, because I want to bring in another abandoned cabin just to sit very close to my building, and I'm going to bring that in just a second. Now let's get in our extra abandoned cabin that I talked about. Now I'm going to be using this particular one. It's a SketchUp file that I got from the 3D warehouse. Also, it's a SketchUp model. I'm going to drag this into my ArchiCAD, and I'm just going to paste it here. And I want to position it very close to my building. And it's going to load and open up. Now that's a SketchUp file. That's a SketchUp model. I got it from 3D warehouse, same as the principal model for this particular design. Now, okay, it's in. I'm going to drag it. I want to position it a little bit, ever so slightly to the edge. Now, it's a model that came with some isolated pine trees, which is just wonderful, by the way. So I want to take it up. It's too far down into my mesh area, so I'm going to click on it. I'm going to go to my bottom offset story. I'm going to take it up by 400. It's not enough, so maybe I do that again. 500. It's still not enough. I think maybe 800 should work. All right, I don't want the entire area of the mesh to be pronounced. I don't want the entire area of the separate model to be pronounced. Just a little bit of surfaces sticking out. That's this particular one here. Now this is supposed to be kind of like an abandoned cabin close to this other one that is supposed to be a habitable cabin, or let's say somebody's living in this principal one and then this other one is abandoned. So that's the idea I'm going for. Now for this other one at the edge, it's not really necessary, although I can extrude my mesh to cover this area, but when we go to our rendering engine, I'm going to do something around this. So let's just leave that to be so for now. All right, so that's mostly all about what I wanted to do on my 3D space. That's mostly about all I wanted to do on my 3D space, just the mesh, a little water around. I'm going to do a little bit more. The next thing I want to do, like I told you earlier in the video, is I'm going to have this mesh. I'm going to have two different layers of the mesh, not just one. So I'm going to copy the mesh. I'm going to drag a copy of the mesh. All right, I'm just going to drag it a bit to the edge. Now the first thing I want to do is to adjust the bottom offset by a tiny amount. Just make this 360. It's a small 10 centimeter offset, very small, ever so subtle adjustment. You could see it here. I'm going to drag it back to the same position. All right, you're going to see why we did that when we get to our 3D engine. All right, just to be able to differentiate one mesh from the other, I'm going to click on this one, and I'm just going to offset the edge outside a little bit, just so I can see it, just so I can see the difference. Sorry, take it in, not outside. I'm going to take it in. So this is one of the mesh, this is another mesh. They are all sitting at the same position, although one is slightly higher than the other one. So I'm going to click on one of the mesh, and I'm going to change the surfaces from grass green to grass brown, or I could change it to any other surface I want to, but just to have two different surfaces. It's going to help when we start applying materials on our, when we start applying the different materials, we're going to see it. All right, so that's just a little adjustment that we just did. Now we are going to start off by going over to the Lumion workspace, and then we're going to start working on this model. It's going to be live sync, so I could always come back to ArchiCAD and make some other adjustments. All right, so our model is now live synced to Lumion. The ArchiCAD Lumion live sync is now active. We're going to go over to Lumion right now. So now this is our model in Lumion. The first thing I want to do in the Lumion workspace is to give the entire scene, I want to give it some boundaries in terms of I want to give some hills basically around the model, so it's not so flat. It's not a flat land, although we are going to populate the scene with a lot of trees and some vegetations. But for now, let's just adjust the ridges at the edge. Let's just give it a lot edges at the boundaries basically. So now I'm going to go to the landscape. Under the landscape tool, I'm going to come to this first one called the height. Clicking on the height, I'm going to raise the landscape around the model. I'm going to raise it up a little bit so it's not so flat. All right, I'm going to come to this edge, click on it, it's coming up. Now I can increase the brush size or the speed, but I don't want it to just happen so rapidly. I want to be a little bit more subtle in that. All right, so let's just do that all around. I think I should just increase the brush size. I could retain the speed, or maybe the size could come up a little bit. All right, ever so slightly. I'm just trying to give the boundaries of my building. Just want to make it, trying to raise it up so it's not so what's it called, so flat basically. Although I'm going to be populating the edge with a lot of trees, so might not really matter, but just a subtle type of adjustment that might come handy during the animation stage. I'm not going to worry so much about the entrance because I'm not going to be rendering this other side. All right, I think I've done that, but I'm not so satisfied with it, so I'm just going to raise it up a little bit more, especially at this point. Still feels a bit flat. Still feels a bit flat. Now notice there are different, the landscape is producing different more materials. You can see the side rock. If you're not a fan of using side rocks for this type of design, you can go to the paint. Under the paint, you can always change the texture of this. You can make this to be maybe this one, this farm rock, just so it's not so, because if you keep it as this, it's a rocky type of feel. So let's go with this other one. I think that's a bit better. All right, so that's the first step. That's the first step. Now the next thing I want to do is to adjust the surfaces of my general area of my mesh. Now the funny thing is, most of this work we did on ArchiCAD, you can actually do that using this area of the landscape in Lumion. But I think it's a bit harder to work with. You may not get precise dimensions and all of that, but that's why I worked on it in ArchiCAD. So let's come to the materials. Now I want this first green to be my landscape area, to be my landscape green rather. So I've clicked on the first green. I'm going to come to landscape, and I've clicked on it. So I've just given this one and then this landscape grass the same color. That's the first stage. Now I'm going to click on this other one, I'm going to select one of the materials that Lumion came with. Let's say we go with the soil. I find that Lumion doesn't really have materials I really fancy. I've been looking for a way to get proper materials, but I'm just going to make do with which one looks better. Which one looks better? I'm not a fan of most of these materials. I'm going to retain this for now. I may come and change it later on, but I'm going to retain this for now. I'm just going to keep the displacement. Just going to take my relief up. See the difference between adjusting your relief. That's the subtle difference. All right, now I'm going to go over to the landscape grass and I'm going to do some adjustments. Under my landscape, I'm going to open up the landscape grass. I'm going to turn it up. Now, firstly, let's adjust the material of the landscape. Now, this is my landscape material, by the way. Now, I think this is okay. The first one was okay. It wasn't that bad. Cold grass, I think that's what they call it. All right, so I think if I'm going to maintain this, you can always change it, by the way, but let's just maintain that for now. So let's go over to our landscape grass. I don't want it to be too much. Now this is just too much. So I'm going to reduce the size a little bit so it doesn't populate my scene so much. But I still want it to be there. I want it to be a bit more subtle, just coming out of the ground a little bit. That's the reason I wanted two different material sizes, by the way. Now the heights, you can always adjust the height, take it down a little bit. I don't want it to be, again, you can always adjust this later. Just working with some base, I just increase the wildness a little bit, so it's a bit more scattered. And I think they say it makes it it makes the grasses stubborn. I think that's the meaning of that. I'm sure that's not the meaning, that's just what people say. So I'm going to add some scattered object around my scene. I'm going to add scattered objects. I'm going to make do with some of these objects. You can always increase the spread, the sizes. It's a big scene, well, not so big a scene, but it's a wide area. So you might want to add some scattered object, just a little bit. I'm also going to be adding some grasses later. This is just some scattered objects that come standard with the landscape. You can begin to see them appear in a subtle way around your scene, basically. You can go ahead and add more of the scattered object if you're okay with that. I'm not going to add the rocks now. Probably do that much later on. Let's spread them a little. It's a bit more subtle. It's not so common. Not so common. Increase the size. Look at one of the scattered objects. Start ranging. That's when you start seeing the beauty of that come on. Randomize the size. All right, so let's proceed. I think that's that about the scattered object. We're going to go next, and then we are going to let's start populating the trees around. Let's start giving the trees, adding some of the trees around. Now, because of the fact that I'm envisaging the trees to be heavy in terms of the numbers of trees I want to have, I'm going to make them into a different layer. I'm going to use layer 2. I'm going to edit layer 2, and I'm going to call that trees. Okay, so I can always turn it off just in case I want to turn it off if my scene becomes too heavy, although I don't think it's going to be that heavy anyway. So I'm going to go to I'm looking for nature. Click on nature. We are going to start off with some broad leaves at the kind of like at the foreground, or the background rather, of the scene. That's too small. I want something bigger, maybe this, but that looks small. Looking for wide, broad leaves. Now you don't have to use like broad leaves or anything. I'm just a bit biased to the broadleaves category in Lumion. So maybe that's why I find those broadleaves a lot more settling. All right, so I think this is okay. I'm going to use two or three different types of these broadleaves. My place method, I could use the mask placement or the cluster or the panes placement, but I think I'm going to use the cluster. Might alternate it anyway as we go on. I'm going to rotate it to this a little bit. Perhaps I should start with the mask placement. I think that might be a lot more subtle. Let's have just at the edge a couple of them here. A couple of them here. I'm going to have a different type of tree there also, by the way. Okay. Still maintaining the mask placement. I'm going to, let's say I want to have another type of broadleaf in my scene. Those two. This one, medium and large. Let's remove this one. All right, so I'm going to click on this. Just gonna have it across this scene. Just something like this. Not just the mask placement around my scene. Could have that. I think that's okay. What I want to do is to have a different type of tree, just a really long. This is a single placement, not mask placement. Just want to have it in between that, and then I populate the scene around it. I think that's. I'm still on the broadleaf category, by the way. I'm just moving through it. Remember, I'm not working from any reference image. Although I think it would be much easier if I had a reference image to work with. That way I don't waste a lot of time trying to select or move through the different options we have just to see what's better. So if you want to achieve a much more better result, it's always more advisable for you to go ahead and work with a reference image. For example, if I was doing this as a paid job, for example, I would have to look for a reference image, so I give my client something a lot better than this. But I think this is okay, at least for the purposes of this class. This is okay. This is okay. All right, let's go ahead and have more trees on this other side. I'm going to go back. What am I looking for? I think I'm looking for still on the broadleaves. I'm thinking of going to look for palm trees, but I think I'm not ready for palm trees yet. So let's still stick to the broadleaves. Yeah, stick to the broadleaves. That's not a slogan, by the way. That's just a thing I say. I think I'm also biased to this particular tree. I'm also biased to that. I could do a little bit of mask placement just behind. Let me do that again. I'm okay with mask placement, but I should delete this. Rather. It's too small. Let's just stick to the stuff I already know. Basically, stick to the one that already worked for me. So let me not be tempted to add more broadleaves, more types of broadleaves rather. I'm holding my control to get this curve, just in case you're wondering. If you're on the mask placement and you want to have like a curve, you can always hold your control to create the curve part. Number of trees, let's increase that a little bit. Let's see what that looks. Let's see what the approach looks like. I feel it's short. It's not so high. Maybe I think it's okay. I mean, I could use some larger trees. I'll probably add a little bit more of those trees later on. All right. Let's extend this. Let's extend this all the way to this point. Oh, I've messed up the geometry. Let me do that again. I've messed up that geometry. So mask placement. That's this too. Holding your control, create your part. Yeah, why is my tree hanging in the middle of nowhere? That's one of the problems when you do rough mass placement. I'm going to delete that, by the way. I keep messing up my geometry for some reason. I keep messing up my geometry. Alright, I'm just going to end it there and then continue another series of mass placements to this point. Alright, that's fine. Let's create some more. Let's put some more types of trees so it doesn't seem boring. Though no such thing as boring anyway. It's all different types of art, basically. Alright, so I'm gonna have this. I could use the cluster placement just to have these types of trees here. Let's cluster it there a little bit. I also like this, whatever that means, whatever that looks like, sorry. So like that. Yeah. That's a funny looking tree trunk color. Alright. The trees that are significantly, I think this color should not be so much into my scene, but I really like this color, so I'm just going to scale it up a little bit. Press L on your keyboard if you want to scale a single item, by the way. Just tuck it in between that space, basically. Alright. I think my scene is becoming heavier, in a more subtle way anyway. Alright. So I'm going to do some palm trees around. I'm going to have some palm trees around. Really tall palm trees, although not gigantic palm trees anyway. Single placement. I'm going to have some palm trees around the building, not dead palm trees, actual palm trees. I want to have one at this edge. I'm going to have this one that is bent. I like the way that looks, that's why I wanted to have that. Just around this abandoned building. So it looks as, maybe the tree is part of the reason why the roof came off. That's a joke, by the way. Alright, so let's work on it a little bit more. Let's work on it. And this is a nice palm that could come at this edge. I could lose some leafless trees. I could have some leafless trees around also. One at this point. Other one that looks like a willow. Is that a willow? No, that's not a willow. I think this is also, I've used this before. I could come to this. This is just a random representation. I feel, or I hope it's going to come out the way we want it to come out. Perhaps. Are we done with our trees? No, we're not done. Let's have some of these. Let's have some of these. We don't have any of that. Let's have some of these. Now remember, it's still scaled up. I've been working with a really high scale, so I'm just going to scale it to about 0.9 or 1. About that is fine. I like the right scale for what Lumion intended the scale of the trees would be. Alright, I'm just having some fancier trees around. Should I call this fancy? They're not really fancy per se. They're just there. Alright, let's place one here. Because in as much as this is a cabin, the principal space should not be so chaotic. Should have some actual, trees around, although not clustered. There's something around to just give it that feel of, oh, this might be a nice cabin to live in, perhaps. Alright, I think that might be too much. That might be a bit much. Let's pause on the trees and let's go to grasses. Let's go to grasses. We're gonna have these. I really like these ones, by the way. I'm going to do cluster placement. I'm going to have it here. I already have some grasses sticking out from the landscape, by the way, so this is just like an additional feel to my area. I'm gonna have cluster placement of this here. I like this one also, though not as much as the other ones, but I do like these types of grasses. Do I do paint placement now? Do I do paint placement? All right, I don't want to have to have my, grasses inside my little pond, although it's kind of like a neat little trick to have them hanging around the pond. All right, let's look for another type. Let it not be, I think, the rough grasses. I'll do a little bit of mass placement of this one. Have it just around here. No, that's not what I was looking for. Delete. I'm deleting this. Delete this. Take this one out. All right. Let's drag it ever so slightly. Number of items. Have them in a row. I hope it comes out really good. I'm just working from memory. I'm trying to create that scene and I'm just working from memory. No reference. Should I have some plants? I think some plants should work. I think some plants should work. Okay. All right.